Wringer, Day 8, Chapter 30. Although she insisted that she would be there right up to the last minute, Dorothy did not come to Palmer's birthday party. Neither did his mother. "I'll leave your father to deal with your hoodlum friends this year," she said, and went off shopping. The guys were thrilled. They had learned about the sharpshooter award, and to them Palmer's father was a big hero, as big a hero as a battlefield general. They kept running back to the den to look at it and touch the trophy. They flung questions. "Is it real gold, Mr. LaRue? How many pigeons did you shoot? Can we see your gun?" At the dining room table, Beans gave a speech about himself, about his hatred of pigeons, and about how many necks he intended to wring. He called to Palmer's father, who was in the kitchen planting candles in the cake. "I bet you hate them dirty birds even more than me, don't you, Mr. LaRue?" Palmer's father came to the doorway. He looked directly at Beans. He smiled. "No," he said, "I don't hate pigeons. Never did." He returned to the cake. The empty look on Beans' face indicated that the answer had reached his ears, but no farther. He called, "You are a ringer, right, Mr. LaRue?" "I was." "And now Snots is too, huh?" "How about that?" The reply from the kitchen came after a long pause. "Palmer decides for himself. It's up to him." Palmer gaped at the doorway as Beans thumped his fist on the table and growled, "Where's the grub?" Like everyone else, Palmer ate his ice cream and cake, but he wasn't hungry. He opened his presents but did not enjoy them. On this day that he had dreaded for so long, he had no appetite for anything. As everyone belted out "Happy Birthday," Palmer stared at the man marching in with the cake and tried to imagine him pulling the trigger again and again as gray feathered nippers fell from the sky. The cake was placed in front of him, and Palmer found that he could neither move nor breathe. The heat from the 10 tiny fires burned his face. In the plump, shimmering shapes of the candle flames, he saw the ghosts of 10 pigeons. "Blow 'em out," someone squawked. Palmer squeezed his eyes shut and blew them out. Outside, after the party, they went in search of Farquar. When Palmer recalled last year's treatment, he could hardly believe his own memory. Pride, honor, little kids lining up to touch his devastated arm. True, last year he felt the same terror that he felt now, but he knew that after Farquhar's 10 knuckles this year, no pride, no honor awaited him, only pain and uselessness. To his great relief, they could not find Farquar. At dinner time, the boys split up and Palmer returned home alone. He fed and played with Nipper. He did not feed himself. He received a happy birthday phone call from Dorothy. Dusk was falling outside when a twinge of hunger sent him to the kitchen. He found the leftover half cake covered and sitting atop the refrigerator. He got down. He set it on the table. He lifted the cover and gasped aloud. Finger lettered in the chocolate icing along the side of the 2-layer cake was a single word: tonight. Chapter 31. Henry. Thinking back, Palmer recalled that as the gang was leaving the house that afternoon, Henry had rushed back in, claiming he had forgotten something. Henry, whose streak, unlike Beans, was meek, not mean. Who ran with Beans and Muddle. Who did what they did, but was different. Who Palmer had seen one day pulling his little sister around the block in a wagon. Henry had done it, fingered the word into the icing. Tonight. It was a warning. Something was going to happen tonight. Something not good. But what? As he smeared over the word with a dinner knife, Palmer thought about it. The only place he would be at night would be in his room, in bed. If something bad were going to happen to him, that's where it would have to be. It must have something to do with Beans and Muddle, or the cat. The cat had already been slipped into the house. Maybe this time, tonight, they would slip themselves in. They had already done so once, and lately Beans especially had taken an interest in Palmer's room. Palmer, acting put out with his parents, kept insisting he was not allowed to have visitors upstairs. This, however, had not prevented Beans from climbing the stairs to the bathroom no fewer than 3 times during the party. Palmer considered phoning Henry to ask him directly, but that felt risky. Left to his best guess, he decided the warning meant that he was to have visitors that night. Considering the guy's recent suspicions, it did not take a genius to figure out that the purpose of the visit had to do with a certain feathered roommate. He went upstairs to feed Nipper, who had returned from his daily wanderings. While the pigeon pecked at nacho pieces, Palmer sat on the bed to think the whole thing through. It occurred to him that he could close and lock his window, and thus keep them out. It was a simple solution, but it also created its own problems. The guys might keep banging on the window all night until Palmer answered. Foiled at Palmer's window, they might get in other ways, other windows. They might wake up his parents. And most important, with the window closed on a hot summer night and no one answering their taps on the pane, they might as well become more suspicious than ever. No, the window had to stay open. He had to let them in. And that meant, of course, that Nipper could not be in the room. Neither could Palmer. He thought about it. They would go downstairs. They would hide in the dark. He did not think the guys would search the whole house. The target was his bedroom. And what could he say next day when Beans asked him where he was last night? He could say it was too hot in his room, so he slept downstairs on the sofa. Or even better, he stayed overnight at relatives. The moon was beaming outside his window when a happy thought came to him. This whole thing could turn in his favor. Once they saw for themselves that there was no pigeon or evidence of a pigeon, they might drop their suspicions. They might believe him. They might back off. So maybe, crazy as it sounded, it was good that they were coming. Palmer had no trouble staying awake in the dark. He was too nervous to sleep. At last he heard his parents' footsteps coming up the stairs. 10 minutes later, the bright crack under his bedroom door went dark. He waited until he thought they were asleep. He turned on the flashlight he had brought up for this night. Nipper up was at his usual spot on the closet shelf. When the light beam struck, the eye facing Palmer went from buttonhole slit to orange button. Otherwise, the bird did not move. This was normal behavior, Palmer knew. Nipper would be easy to handle. When he settled down to roost, he went into a dopey trance that firecrackers could not disturb. Palmer stood on a chair and, cupping his hands, gently lifted his forbidden pet from the shelf. Holding both pigeon and flashlight was tricky, but Palmer managed to tiptoe downstairs without waking up the house. At first he sat on the sofa, with Nipper in his lap. Still feeling unsafe, he went behind the sofa. He turned off the flashlight. In the utter darkness, he felt himself to be nothing but ears and fingertips. He could feel Nipper's heartbeat, putt-putting away behind the toothpick ribs like a tiny motor scooter. He could feel the cold, golden gaze of the trophy pigeon 2 rooms away. The silence of the house at night was not total. Somewhere a clock was ticking. Cricks and creaks came from nearby and distant quarters as if the house were twitching in a sleep of its own. Palmer tried to aim his hearing upstairs. He held his breath as long as he could, listening. Was that a window screen opening? A footstep? He pictured them in his room, shadows dark upon dark. Beans' penlight, like a starflake, moving in the darkness, pointing at the bed. He's not here. Pointing under the bed, shining on the bookcase, the basket rim, the desk, the closet shelf, the empty closet shelf, the closet. Oh no, the closet floor, the honey crunchers. He had forgotten to bring them downstairs. Would they see them? Would they figure the cereal was Palmer's for snacking? Or would they guess the real reason? He thought of going up, because maybe they were not there. Racing up the stairs, grabbing the cereal box, racing back down. 10 seconds was all he needed. He could do it. But what if they were there? What if that creak he just heard? He stayed put. He crouched and cringed behind the sofa as if neither furniture nor darkness were enough to hide him. He stayed through 1,000 tocks of the unseen clock, and another 1,000, and the bonging of his heart. And only when he heard from behind the house 2 sharp, quick yelps did he know for absolutely sure that they had been there. And even then he waited for another 1,000 tocks before he swallowed himself or allowed himself a deep breath and, at last, sleep. Chapter 32. He awoke to Nipper pecking at his ear. And just in time. His father, earliest bird in the house, was coming down the stairs. He scooped up his pigeon and crouched behind the sofa. When his father passed into the kitchen, he dashed up the steps and into his room. Glancing around, he saw no evidence of night visitors. The window screen was firmly shut. Everything was in its place. Except one thing. As he soon found out. He hadn't even had breakfast yet when the doorbell rang. As soon as he opened the door, he found himself facing the Nerf basketball. Curling around it were Beans' fingers. Who's Nipper? Palmer could not think fast enough. Beans pressed the ball into Palmer's nose. Who wrote this? He did not want to get Dorothy involved. I did, he said. So who is Nipper? Palmer blurted the first thing that came to mind. Me. It used to be my nickname when I was little. He looked at them all. Before I knew you guys. Weddle stepped up beside Beans. We think Nipper's a pigeon. Palmer made a shocked face. Pigeon? What would I do with a pigeon? What would you do with that cereal and nachos you got in your room? Said Beans. Palmer laughed, showing them how wrong they were. Snacks. I keep stuff in my room so I don't have to go all the way down to the kitchen. He waited to kick himself for forgetting about Nipper's food. And where were you last night? Said Beans. It occurred to Palmer that he had a right to questions of his own. Where was I? Where were you? He glanced at Henry. Henry's face showed nothing. Where did you get my ball? Beans grinned. We came to see you last night. You weren't there, said Muddle. Palmer nodded. I know. I was sleeping overnight at somebody's. My cousin's. I wasn't here. Henry was staring at the sky. Palmer saw Henry for what he was, a captive, strong enough to warn him about last night, but too weak to do anything except follow Beans. He saw in Henry something of himself, and worse, what he could become. Beans scowled at the ball, at Palmer. You ain't Nipper. You're Snots. He dropped the ball to the ground and stepped on it. When he raised his foot, the foam ball reclaimed its roundness. Beans cursed and stomped on the ball with both feet, flattening it, grinding it into the sidewalk. For a full minute, he grunted with the effort, and again the ball popped back to shape. He kicked it away. He yanked on Palmer's arm. Let's go. We got to find Farquar. They found Farquar in front of the deli, eating chocolate cupcakes and drinking Coke. Beans announced, pointing to Palmer, Birthday boy, 10 years old. Slouched against the deli window, Farquar took a swig of Coke. He swished it around in his mouth. He raised his upper lip, giving himself a rodent-like face, and spit a thin stream of Coke between his front teeth. The boys shot backward. Farquar peered at Palmer. Wringer, huh? Palmer did not answer. He needs the treatment, said Beans. Farquar glared. You rushing me? Beans spread his arms. No, I'm just saying. Farquar bit a cupcake in half. Chocolate icing covered his teeth. What's it look like I'm doing? Eating? Replied Beans tentatively. Eating breakfast, said Farquar, washing down his mouth full with Coke. The boys took another step back. You don't say nothing while I'm eating breakfast. You understand? All four boys nodded. They retreated to the curb and sat down, facing the street, not daring to even look at Farquar. After a long time, they heard his voice. Okay. They turned. He was walking up the sidewalk. They got up and followed. He turned into an air shaft between two storefronts and went back to the alley. He stopped. He backed away from them, making space. All faces were grim. No one spoke. Farquar pointed to the ground in front of him. He looked into Palmer's eyes. Step up. Palmer stepped up. Right or left? Left. Roll it up. He rolled his sleeve up to his shoulder. He blinked several times. He looked around. He rolled his sleeve back down. He took a step back. He shook his head. Farquhar's brow pinched in surprise. What? No, said Palmer. The word came out choked and dry. No, said Farquar. A chocolate crumb was wedged between his front teeth. No, said Palmer, clearly this time. He heard shuffling behind him. No what? No what? Palmer moved away from them all, facing them all. They stared at him, waiting. He saw the foot grinding the ball, the name into the sidewalk. He heard the scream, heard it coming, a split second before the others heard it. The scream that he knew now had been growling inside him for a long time. He planted his feet and bent his knees and balled his fists and let it come all the way out. No nothing. No treatment. No Wringer. No Snots. He thrust his scream at Beans. I'm not Snots. My name is Palmer. My name is Palmer. He stepped back. He hunkered down. No. They ran. Then he ran. Down the alleys, down the streets. He ran like he had never run before. If Farquar was with him, he would be caught. But he knew that. But if not, he might be able to outrun the guys. He heard their sneakers slapping the pavement behind him. He heard their calls. You're dead meat, Snots. I'm going to eat that pigeon of yours. I'm going to wring its neck and pull its head off. I'm pulling your head off. He ran and ran. Chapter 33. A bug crawled down the middle of his back. He tried to reach it. He whipped off his shirt, ran a fingertip up his spine. It wasn't a bug. It was sweat. The sun boiled in a cloudless sky. The dumpster had been slowly reeling in its shadow, so that he now had to sit with his back flat against it and his knees drawn up in order to remain wholly in the shade. The dumpster's metal flank felt cool and crusty against his bare back. His breath and heartbeat had long since returned to normal. The noontime music of church bells had passed an hour ago, maybe two. He was hungry, thirsty, but also safe. the only other safe place being his own house, which was exactly 5.5 blocks from this dumpster behind the great grocer supermarket. A back door slammed open. Out came a worker dragging 2 hugely swollen black plastic bags. Seeing Palmer, he said, "You waiting to help me?" Was the man joking? He wasn't smiling. "No," answered Palmer. With a grunt, the worker heaved one bag, then the other, into the dumpster. He looked down at Palmer. He wagged his head. "Made in the shade." He went back inside. 5.5 blocks. In his head, Palmer plotted a course that, except for the final half block, kept him in alleyways. Even so, streets would have to be crossed in broad daylight. And anyway, the guys themselves took alleys as often as streets. They could be anywhere, around any corner, behind any parked car. They could be in front of the great grocer right now, asking people, "Did you see a kid?" They might already be spreading word around town. Palmer LaRue has a pigeon. He knew that if that fact had ever been in question, the question had been answered speculatively by his actions of the morning. The back door slammed. The worker came out, but this time there was nothing in his hands but a can of Sprite. He stopped in front of Palmer and held the can down to him. It hadn't been opened. "You look like you need this, kid." It occurred to Palmer that this might be some kind of trick. He was too thirsty to care. He took the can. It felt blessedly cold. He stared up at the man. He felt like crying. The man's lips almost smiled. "On the house," he said, and he was gone. Palmer snapped open the Sprite and drank the can empty, taking time out only to gasp for breath. He lay his head back against the dumpster and closed his eyes. In spite of himself, in spite of everything, for a precious few seconds he felt good. His first idea had been to wait until dark, then make a run for home. As the sun dropped below the roof line of the great grocer, he began to see that the idea was bad. Nipper would be coming home soon, and who could say that they were not waiting for him, maybe even on the porch roof itself, with stones, slingshots. Suddenly it was clear. He had to get home before Nipper. Now. He dropped the can and ran. Alley and street, he took the fastest way, driven by images of Nipper flying into a blizzard of stones. As he approached the turn onto his block, it occurred to him that they might be waiting at his front door. It occurred to him that this might be his last minute on earth. He slowed down and thought of Nipper and ran on. They were not there. He burst into his house. He wanted to collapse right then and there to rub his face in the living room rug, but he dared not stop. He took the stairs, 3 at a time, flung open the door. Nipper was at the window, on the sill outside the screen, and inside, sitting on his pillow, was the yellow cat, Panther, facing the window, its head as still as a statue, its tail sweeping slowly from side to side. It hadn't even bothered to look at Palmer. The closest thing was a comic book. Palmer hurled it. The cat hissed, screeched, leaped to the floor, and was downstairs before Palmer finished his screen. It was then, as he opened the screen to let Nipper in, that he knew his pigeon must go. Chapter 34. Dorothy was crying. "Why tomorrow?" "Because they know," he said for the 3rd time. He pounded the bed. They know, they know, they know. And they're not gonna wait. Plus Pigeon Day's coming up. It's only gonna get worse. "Henry wouldn't hurt Nipper." "Henry doesn't count. It's the others," she implored. "But why? Why can't you just hide him in the house, or in my house?" "They'll find out." He spoke wearily, pacing. "They were right in this room last night. The cat was here today. They know everything. They won't give up. What we really ought to do is take him out tonight, under cover of darkness." She blurted, "No." "So," he shrugged, "tomorrow." She slumped facing the wall, her forehead leaning into it. "Why don't they just let him alone?" She looked at him as if the answer were his to reveal. "What did he ever do to them?" He looked up to the closet shelf, where Nipper was roosting. "He was born a pigeon, that's what." "But how can you do it?" she whined. The months of spring and summer had filed his nerves to a point. He was nearly galloping back and forth across the room, though he muffled the volume of his voice lest his parents hear. His entire body screamed. "How can I do it? How can I do it? Can't you get through it through your head? They're gonna kill him. Do you want him dead?" Earlier in the day, Dorothy had seen the unflattenable Nerf ball in the street and had retrieved it. She stroked it now in her lap. Her voice was barely audible. "I just don't want him gone." He went to the window. The quarter moon was out. He began to weep. "Do you think I do?" The next morning, they met at 6 o'clock with bikes. Dorothy's bike had a wicker basket fixed to the handlebars. That's where the shoebox went. Palmer had dumped the toy soldiers onto the bed, poked air holes into the lid, and deposited the pigeon. They had told their parents that they were going on an early morning breakfast picnic to the park. In the basket also lay a box of donuts and many cartons of iced tea. They rode to the park, and out of the park, and out of town. They rode past the barbecue restaurant and the burnout barn and the golf course, whose dew-topped greens looked like silver ponds. They stopped only to switch bikes when Dorothy could no longer bear to transport the basket. They pedaled down roads they had seen only from a car before, and then down roads they had never seen at all. The only sounds were the whir of spokes, the crunch of tires. Up and down hills they rode and rode until it seemed they must be in another state, if not another country. Palmer, leading the way, pulled off the road by a field where horses were grazing. "Let's eat," he said. Dorothy took the donuts and drinks from the bike basket. "Is this where we let him go?" "No, not far enough." "Not far enough?" He punched a straw into an iced tea carton and took a long sip. He shook his head. "We have to go as far as we can. Pigeons can find their way back from a long way off." Dorothy broke off a piece of donut and stuck it under the lid of the shoebox. It was immediately snatched from her fingers. "I can't even find my way back from here. You're not a pigeon." He bit into a donut. "Even far's not enough. It has to be confusing, too." She was alarmed. "What do you mean? We're not going to blindfold him." He sneered. "No, but something else. You'll see." He had taken only one bit of donut. He slipped the rest into the shoebox. "Let's go." Another endless stretch of riding brought them to an unfenced meadow. Palmer said, "Here," and veered into it. "Wait," he called back. Dorothy stopped at the roadside and watched Palmer drive her bicycle deeper into the meadow. The wheels jumped. The basket bounced over the clouded earth. Thistletops erupted. Wildflowers wobbled as the bike charged in reckless patterns only a fly could follow. Circles, figure eights, zigzags, crazy doodles. This went on for many minutes when suddenly the bike bolted on a beeline into the woods beyond. Dorothy waited as long as she could before becoming impatient, then worried. She could not see an inch into the dense tree line. The sun was directly overhead, making a shadowless desert of the meadow. The handlebars of the bicycle were hot. Then, there he was, popping from the woods, pedaling fiercely straight at her, the donut box flying in the basket. As he came closer, she saw that his face was red and wet, his mouth twisted. The shoebox was empty. He did not stop nor look at her, but charged with a clatter onto the road. It was a long time before he slowed down, allowing her to catch up. They switched back to their own bikes. They rode in silence. They asked directions at a gas station. They bought sodas and threw away the donuts. When they coasted the final hill into town, the streets were in shadow. Wearily they climbed the stairs to Palmer's room. Nipper was waiting on the windowsill.